Hi, and welcome to the show. And I have no idea what this is Wednesday. This is Wednesday, October the something. Third, I don't know. No, 5th, I guess. Anyway, we welcome you to the show. I'm having a challenge getting on my phone. It's saying I can't make phone calls on it. So I'm using Michael to welcome you to the show. And our calling number is 516-418-5786. I'm about to get right. And we'd love to hear your comments and your questions because it makes it your show. And this is Recovery Wednesday. So welcome to the show. Hey, Michael.
Thank you, dear heart. One of those fun starting points. You're kind of outside of the routine being here in St. Louis, Missouri, and we're at a place where we don't have a very good cell connection. So I'm sitting out in the backyard. It's an absolutely gorgeous day. It's probably about 70 degrees, totally clear blue skies, sunshine is absolutely awesome. What a day for recovery. And I was speaking to some friends last night. Actually, the gentleman that we're staying with, he and his wife, is an attorney. And in our conversation, he's actually writing a book about Hitler. And so the conversation turned to a piece of information that Dr. Tim introduced us to, probably a year or more ago, about a gentleman who was found in one of the Nazi concentration camps. And as I talked about it, I actually looked up the story on the web and sent, Jeannie has a copy of it on our website, so I sent it to him by email. But it seemed like this story is recovery in a nutshell. As I read it again and thinking about Recovery Wednesday, it's like this is just so perfect in the fastest way you could possibly do it, and for one of the best reasons possible, how to recover the truth of who you are. And that's what our recovery game is about. So this story is recounted in a book by Pierre Pradovand called The Gentle Art of Blessing. And it actually comes from a book written by Dr. George Ritchie called Return from Tomorrow. And Ritchie was a doctor with the American troops in World War II who took part in the liberation of the camps from Nazi Germany. He became acquainted, I'm going to just read the story, became acquainted with a Polish prisoner who was nicknamed Wild Bill Cody. And here's the story. That wasn't his real name. His real name was 7 unpronounceable syllables in Polish, but he had a long drooping handlebar mustache like pictures of the old Western hero. So the American soldiers called him Wild Bill. He was one of the inmates of the concentration camp, but obviously he hadn't been there long. His posture was erect, his eyes bright, his energy indefatigable. Since he was fluent in English, French, German, and Russian, as well as Polish, he became kind of the unofficial camp translator. We came to him with all sorts of problems. The paperwork alone was staggering in an attempt to relocate people whose families, even hometowns, might have disappeared. But though Wild Bill often worked 15 and 16 hours a day, he showed no signs of weariness. While the rest of us were drooping with fatigue, he seemed to gain strength. We have time for this old fellow, he'd say. He's been waiting to see us all day. His compassion for his fellow prisoners glowed on his face. And it was this glow that I came to when my own spirits were low. So I was astonished to learn when Wild Bill's own papers came before us one day, that he had been in Wuppertal since 1939. For 6 years he lived on the same starvation diet, slept in the same airless and disease-ridden barracks as everyone else, but without the least physical or mental deterioration. Perhaps even more amazing, every group in the camp looked on him as a friend. He was the one to whom the quarrels between the inmates were brought for arbitration. Only after I'd been at Wuppertal for a number of weeks did I realize what a rarity this was in a compound where different nationalities of prisoners hated each other almost as much as they hated the Germans. As for the Germans, feeling against them ran so high that in some of the camps liberated earlier, former prisoners had seized guns, run to the nearest village, and simply shot any Germans that they saw. Part of our instructions were to prevent this kind of thing happening again, and Wild Bill was our greatest asset, reasoning with the different groups and counseling forgiveness. It was not easy for some of them to forgive, I commented to him one day as we sat over mugs of tea in the processing center. So many of them have lost members of their families. Wild Bill leaned back in the upright chair and sipped his drink. We lived in the Jewish section of Warsaw, he began slowly. The first words I'd heard him speak about himself. My wife, our 2 daughters, and our 3 little boys. When the Germans reached our street, they lined up everyone against the wall and opened up with machine guns. I begged to be allowed to die with my family. But because I spoke German, they put me into a work group. He paused, perhaps seeing again his wife and 5 children. I had to decide right then, he continued, whether to let myself hate the soldiers who had done this. It was an easy decision, really. I was a lawyer. In my practice, I'd seen too often what hate could do to people's minds and bodies. Hate had just killed 6 people who mattered most to me in the world. I decided then that I would spend the rest of my life, whether it was a few days or many years, loving every person I came in contact with. Loving every person. This was power that had kept this man well in the face of every privation. His decision was not made out of any religious belief, but because he witnessed how love regenerated and how hate destroys. Pretty powerful story about recovery. And I cannot even fathom, I could perhaps, do something of a shadow of imagining what a man must go through who watches that happen, what kind of pain, what kind of rage, what kind of, who knows, would go on inside of one. And here's a man in the face of that who chose to recover the truth of his being. And that's our whole point on Recovery Wednesdays, is that whoever you're pointing your fear, your rage, your guilt, your grief, your hatred at, they do not have a problem. The hate, the fear, the rage, the guilt that you're pointing at them is your problem. It's not theirs. And you lose your being, the truth of who you are, to that internal pain and trauma. Recovery is about, and of course we have an experiential definition for human life in this work, and that is just hold a newborn child. When you hold a newborn, you will know exactly what a human life is. And to recover that human life is the whole purpose of this work. The tools for moving back into the truth of who we are as human beings and recognizing that while all of the rationalizations and the justifications in the world would tell us that it is insane to forgive, and remember here that forgiveness doesn't mean I let you off the hook for what's happening inside of me. The only sane option is forgiveness. That is, to apply forgiveness to remove what's in me that destroys me. And here's a man who chose to do that, and after 6 years in a camp where everybody else is emaciated and dying of starvation, here's a man who's still muscular, strong, posture erect, bright eyes, and alive. That's the power of the presence of a human life, and refusing to give the presence of loving you up to anything that is less than love. And of course, when one holds so much pain that they either refuse or do not have the understanding or the tools with which to forgive, then it seems that that's impossible and not an option. Personally, I've spent the last 35 years studying the first century Aramaic words of Yeshua to understand the technology that he taught, the awesome, monumental technology of how to reach inside of ourselves and remove that which buries the truth of who we are and be returned to the presence of love, real recovery. The average person in our culture, and excuse the noise if you're hearing in the background, I can only get a decent phone signal when I'm outside here, so there are some ambulances going around the area. I hope there's not too much noise in the background. But so the recovery of the truth of who we are is what we're here for, and the technology of first century Aramaic forgiveness is the main thing that we're here to share with you. And so we're honored and delighted that you're here. And Jeannie, are you on with us yet? Were you able to get things operating on your phone?
I am. I just had to reboot it. I don't know what was holding it off, but anyway, I am back, and I'd just like to say thank you to both Dr. Tim and Michelle for filling in for us yesterday while we spent time taking care of Krista and Addie. And anybody who is friends with me on Facebook, and I'm actually listed on Facebook as Jeanette Shaw in Bristol, Tennessee, then you've gotten to read my conversations from yesterday. And
they're great.
I spent 9 hours with a 4.5-year-old, and the only adult conversations I had was when I placed orders for food or bought her ticket somewhere. And so the rest of the time, my conversations were with this 4.5-year-old, and she said so many whys and so many questions, and her insight on some things was just hilarious. And I said, I think everybody needs to spend a whole day with a child every now and then just to get reconnected to some of the stuff that's really important. But it's hilarious
Perhaps
to get an
share
opportunity
a couple of those stories then.
They were phenomenal. It was. I'll have to open up Facebook. Okay, hold on. I'll have to open up Facebook first. One of the things, we went into several museums, and there was this one that she really liked of dinosaurs, but it had a T-Rex, and it had taken this big bite out of one of the other little dinosaurs. I can't pronounce its name, a Triceratops or something or other. Anyway, it's an herbivore, and she was wanting to know why that one dinosaur bit the other dinosaur. And I said, well, I said, the one that's laying on the ground is a vegetarian. And I said, the other one's a meat eater. And I said, so, when they're meat eaters, that means they eat meat, and eating meat means another animal. And it was like, well, why? And I said, well, that's just the way it is. And I've kind of brought it current. And I said, if you eat bacon, I said, you're eating pig. If you eat a steak, you're eating a cow. And I said, you eat eggs and chickens, and, I said, all of those are animals. And so if you're going to eat meat, then an animal has to give its life for that. And she goes, well, I'm vegetarian. And I reminded her that she had ordered bacon and eggs, and she goes, but I don't eat it very often. And then she turned around and looked at the T-Rex and said, you're bad. It was just so sweet the way she did that. But she wanted to know if Pawpaw had any kids. And I said, yeah. I said, your mom is one of them, and your Uncle Michael is the other one. And she looked at me and goes, why? And it was like I had no answer to that. It was just stuff like that all day long. And she was just precious. But it was why on everything. And then she looked at me one time. We went to this playhouse. It's called the Magic House. And she said, I have always dreamed about coming to this place. And on Facebook I said, do I dare tell her how many times that she's been there, or do I just stay the wonderful Jeannie who brought her here today? But she was a trip.
I like the story about the hamster. When she was 3, she had a hamster. Go ahead and share that. That's so cute.
Yeah, she was sitting in the back seat, in her car seat, and she was talking about she used to have a hamster. And I said, oh, don't you still have it? And she goes, no, it died 20 years ago when I was just little, and I was so sad. She has no concept of time or space. Anyway.
They are a trip.
And we have taken
let's
her
say hello to Dr. Tim.
Okay, go for it.
See if he's going to share with us. Dr. Tim, are you with us?
I am here.
Thank you for your help yesterday. By the way, Krista is doing well. She had what they thought was going to be a fairly serious hernia surgery to be done, and it was interesting. I was at her house at about 5 in the morning and got her to the hospital, and about 15 minutes after I left, the doctor's on the phone to me. I was like, oh, what's going on here? So, well, we're done. And apparently it was not nearly as serious as they thought it was going to be. It was pretty simple. It took a stitch in around the umbilical cord, and all was well. So I got to spend the rest of the day kind of just hanging out with her, taking care of her, getting her out of the, she came out of the anesthetic. They did a general for this thing. And so, but she's doing well. And we're actually going to go have lunch with her and Adeline after we're finished the show. So thank you for your support yesterday.
Well, you're very welcome. Glad to hear she's doing well. We were sending love and prayers from the entire community at the end of the show yesterday, and we had our support group last night, and we watched another segment of the Way of Mastery Darshans, and the overlaps are just amazing. The complete responsibility for everything you're feeling, and the way to look at things with innocence, and then a wonderful discussion. A relatively small group for my Tuesday group. There were 5 people plus me, and then eventually later on in the group somebody else came in. But as I say every week, it's just a wonderful, loving group of people and a fabulous set of tools to apply to whatever bothers me, and my life's getting better as a result. So we had some people on the show yesterday. Michelle was sharing a bit about her shows from earlier in the month, last month, where she was so triggered, and how useful that was. And we discussed how it was useful because she was willing to be so honest and willing to accept feedback. And then Susan Darnell came on and talked about a wonderful series of shifts she's had from doing the work, and how it's moved her to have a whole different energy and perspective on her relationship with her daughter, and a wonderful breakthrough she's had there. So it was just a lovely show. So thanks for the opportunity to host and be around all these people who are raising wonderful questions and choosing to do their work.
I don't know whether Susan shared it with you yesterday, but she had shared with me earlier that she has a grandson that is the child of her son. And in the early days of his birth, she was warned that she shouldn't talk about these things to him or to her son. And more recently, he's been encouraging her to share the tools with her grandson and with her son, and just huge openings in both the relationship with her son and her daughter. So congratulations on your work there, Susan. It's just awesome to watch, and the openings that come with each person that does their work are pretty fabulous.
Agreed. Hopefully somebody else has a hand up and we can help somebody else today.
All right, well, let's say hello and see what's happening. Jeannie, you got anybody out there with a hand up?
Nobody has their hand up, but Miss Gail is on, so I've got her turned on there.
Well, let's say hello to the young lady. How are you?
Good morning. I am well.
Fabulous. What's on your mind?
I am looking forward to this
today?
weekend.
So am I. Yeah, we're going to get to be out in Vandalia on Saturday afternoon with Gail doing a Why Is This Happening to Me Again workshop. If anybody's in the St. Louis area, we'll be in Vandalia, Illinois, until 5 o'clock at, what's the name of the hospital, Gail?
Fayette County Hospital. It's the long-term care portion of the building and that conference room that we're going to be in. So, yes, I'm looking forward to that, and I've talked to the the local radio station and have got us on the community calendar for that to be advertised, and been hanging flyers all over the place, and have talked to a pretty local recovery center to see if they would send their folks in our direction. And the director said that he would be willing to have a recovery center. It's a recovery home. It's an old schoolhouse that has been remodeled and refurbished, and this recovery center has been open since '88. And so they're interested in having the workshop, and so we'll see how that works out. And I have at least 10 confirmed yeses that we will be there. So I'm very excited, and people are bringing food, and it should be a good time.
Yay. Well, I'm excited.
Yay.
Looking forward to it, and we'll see you on Saturday afternoon. So anybody that's in the St. Louis area, come and play.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. As far as your the topic, the opening topic about them finding that gentleman, that could go along very well with some of the things that we do in the 12-step world. One of the things that is encouraged that we talked about is that resentment is the number one killer of alcoholics. And resentment is the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stems all forms of spiritual disease. For we have not only been mentally and physically ill, but we have been spiritually sick. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. So it's talking about the inventory, which is our fourth step, which is we have taken a fearless and moral inventory. And one of the things that it talks about, it says it's plain that life that includes deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness. To the precise extent that we permit these, do we squander the hours that might have been worthwhile. But with the alcoholic, whose hope is the maintenance of and growth of spiritual experience, this business of resentment is infinitely grave. We found it to be fatal. For when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit. The insanity of alcohol returns and we drink again. And with us, to drink is to die. And one of the things that they recommend, there's actually 5 4-step prayers. Every step has a prayer and a promise. And the 4th step has 5 prayers. And the first prayer is a resentment prayer. The second prayer is a fear prayer. And the last 3 are sex prayers about, being in the right spiritual mind when it includes, sex or relationship issues. And the fear prayer goes like this. It goes, we ask God to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. When a person offended, we said to ourselves, this man is sick. How can I be helpful to him? Save me from being angry. Thy will be done. So the next paragraph after that real quick, and I'll see what you have to say about this. We avoid retaliation or argument. We wouldn't treat sick people that way. If we do, we destroy a chance of being helpful. We cannot be helpful to all people, but at least God will show us how to take a kindly and tolerant view to each and every one. So anyway, and before that prayer too, it said, this is pretty important. I was trying to find this. It says, though we did not like their symptoms and the way they disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too. And I had to constantly be reminded at meetings that they are just I am just as sick as they are. I'm not weller than they are. So it, to the degree that I allowed other people to disturb me was the degree of how far I was into my illness as well, and focusing on the wrongs that they'd done instead of connecting to Source or to God. So that's what I got as far as Recovery Wednesday is concerned. I think that goes really well along with what you said.
Absolutely. And two thoughts that I have. One is you'll notice that once again, the subtlety of how denials creeps in and how constantly one has to be on guard against denial and to make sure that the language one speaks is responsibility language so that the hidden parts of the mind reveal themselves. So when I talk about how somebody disturbed me, of course, once again, I'm in denial. You see, that out there is the cause of my disturbance. Excuse me. If I'm disturbed, the cause of my disturbance is the disturbed energy in me. Got nothing to do with them. They're the ones who happen to show it to me. But you'll notice that if they weren't showing it to me today, somebody was showing it to me yesterday, and last week somebody else, and the month before, and the year before, and the decade before, there was somebody else who was showing it to me. But as long as we live in that state of denial, and it's so subtle how it sneaks in that, oh yeah, well, I allowed them to disturb me. No, you didn't, because they didn't disturb you. They showed you had disturbance. What a gift. What an awesome gift. That's my first thought, is just for us all to just be continuously on guard with language, because language tells the mind how to build the perceptual world that you see. So it's just so powerful and so important. And the other thought, you shared the two petitions on fear and resentment. But then you said there were 3 petitions, and the world calls them prayers, but prayer is more being the space of active love, as the first century Aramaic Yeshua taught it, and that when we ask the Creator for something or we ask for support, we're petitioning. And you mentioned that there were 3 in the realm of sexuality, and that's such a huge issue in the world today, that I think it'd be awesome if you share those 3 petitions around the arena of relationships and sexuality.
Okay, I can do that. And thank you for pointing that out. Thank you for pointing out my denial and understood and agreed on that. I just shared the resentment prayer, the petition. And I agree and understand there as well, and I needed to change my language to suit. The fear prayer, actually, the fear petition is on page 68 in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it is very short and sweet. It could almost, for me, it could be turned into a mantra.
Right.
It says that we ask him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what he would have us be. And then the sex prayers, and I think the co-founder, Bill W., did this on purpose, because he has all the sex stuff on page 69. I think he did that on purpose.
Okay.
Anyway, just a tidbit. It says the first prayer says we ask God to mold our ideals and to help us to live up with them. And it says up there, we remembered always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly, selfishly, or to be despised or loathed. The other prayer, farther on down the page, says we ask God what we should do in each specific manner. The right answer will come. And then on page 70, we earnestly pray for the right ideal, for guidance in each questionable situation, for sanity, and for the strength to do the right thing. So those are the 3 prayers, or 3 petitions.
Right. Awesome. Very powerful. And that first one, speaking about this sex power, this creative energy that flows through us, and very powerfully in the area of physical intimacy, and that our culture has kept us so ignorant of the way those energies flow, and have kept us in a state where understanding the power of that energy and how to utilize that energy with integrity is something that eludes most of humanity most of their lives. And once we start to realize that this energy, as with all energy, flows in conformity to laws, in conformity to the way these eternal forces operate, and that there's a place where Yeshua addresses that in the scriptures in just kind of a subtle but interesting way. And there's a scenario where women, of course, don't go out in public without being totally covered, but they'll be out in the back of their homes. They'll be in their what we would call yards, bathing, and the men would crawl up on the rooftops of the local buildings to, become peeping Toms, or peeping whatever you would call somebody in the Middle East. And Yeshua addresses that, and he gives a whole other level of understanding of what directs and moves this very powerful energy. And, they're talking about adultery. Well, if I haven't slept with, my neighbor's wife, then I haven't committed adultery. And Yeshua says if you've done it in your mind, then you've committed adultery. You have violated the way this energy is designed to move in you, and that we are designed to understand the flow of that energy and to move it with total integrity. And this is an area in the 12-step work that I hadn't touched into before, but it's so powerfully put and so appropriately put that the whole world would benefit by having those particular passages available to them, and understand how to be in integrity with the flow of sexual energy, both in the physical realm, actually not both, I'd say in all realms, in the physical, the mental, the verbal, the emotional, and that the cause level of that energy, the overriding cause level that can throw us out of integrity, is what we do in our minds. And, we basically live in a culture that says, fantasize about anybody that you want, and, whoever you can get to hop into bed with you, so what? You get your pleasure, and hey, who cares? And the gross violation of the movement of that energy leads to all kinds of challenges in our world, and all kinds of trauma and pain, which then ultimately lead many people, or as it said, drives them to drink. Is I have no other way to anesthetize the pain that comes from this energy, that I have no clue how or why it moves in me, and so I'll just anesthetize myself. And that when we begin to move and come into integrity, then the whole game changes. And so delighted to hear that. Thank you for sharing that.
You are welcome. That's one of the areas that we inventory in the 4-step. There's 4 different areas of our life that we inventory when we do an inventory, and the first one is resentment. We write down all the people that we resent, and we write down what they did to us, and then we mark what it affects, and then we ask ourselves 5 questions where we've been dishonest, selfish, frightened, inconsiderate, and self-seeking, I believe, is the other one. And then we look at ourselves when we answer those questions and see how we set the ball in motion. We also examine fear, and then we examine sex conduct and harms done to others. And the sex conduct part of the inventory, we ask ourselves some different questions. We write down the people that we're involved with, and then we write down what we did to them. So it turns back around. We ask ourselves, did we evoke jealousy? Let me flip over here. We reviewed our conduct over the years past, where we'd been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate. Whom did we hurt? Did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Where were we at fault? What should we have done instead? And that's what I ask people when I'm listening to a 5th step is, what could we have done instead? And so it's a very powerful process, especially in the fifth-step process, to look at that. Because if you take self-centered fear, which is the basis of all of our character defects, and then apply that towards sex conduct, that's a very dangerous area, and it's definitely something that needs to be examined and looked over and overhauled, and questioning the messages of the culture, and violating other people's personal sexual energy, and getting rid of that guilt, shame, and remorse of both violating other people's and having ours violated. And so, yeah, it's a very powerful, freeing process to examine that.
Definitely, and an urgent place to look. Jeannie and I just watched a video last night called Misrepresentation, and it's MISS, and it's a corollary to a video we talked about a couple of weeks ago about how young men are brainwashed to be in this culture as men, and how bizarre and insane, and when you mentioned those words, self-centered fear, how they are imbued with that self-centered fear that needs to be inventoried and cleaned up, and how important that is, this whole cultural message of what a man is. And then last night, once we had watched that and found it so powerful, we picked up and ordered the corollary video to it, which is about women and how they're programmed in this culture. We actually just got through about half of it last night, but it very powerfully addresses how women are objectified in our culture, and of course men the same thing from that last one, but how they are objectified and turned into sex objects, and then as sex object, if they don't measure up to some sort of a visual standard or whatever, and they're going through all the insane surgeries that people do in order to be the perfect body, and that the human being is left out of the equation. So that would be for any women's group, and I wouldn't be shocked if Jeannie ends up at some point in her Women Healing Women using that video to really start to look at the self-centered fear that's instilled by our culture, that's so promoted at every turn in the media, that you have to be, look like this. One of the visuals they do is they show the magazine covers and how, people are Botoxed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then they make the point that they show several magazine covers how every image on that magazine cover that looks so perfect, there is no one who looks like that, not the person whose picture is on the magazine cover, because that's been airbrushed and photoshopped and changed. And that this insane ideal of this sexual object called a woman, or the insane ideal of the sexual object called a man, that instills and has so many people tied into this self-centered fear that you're talking about there, and how deeply it needs to be addressed to get to the point where, instead of, if I don't measure up to that, if I don't look like that, then I'm not beautiful, then I'm not worthy, then I'm not whole, then I'm not whatever word you want to put in there, and to come to the point where one realizes who they are as a human being, as love, and that they are not bodies, and that the body, or the so-called body, is simply a medium of energetic expression. And the cleanup job there for recovery is absolutely huge, what both men and women do in order to cover that pain, to enter into, sexual relationship, and the inane standards that people hold themselves and others to, and because of what's going on in their minds, can't really enter into real, actual relationship. And so the power of all of that to drive people to drink, for the pain and the trauma of that self-centered fear and self-rejection is so deep and needs to be so deeply delved into and forgiven, removed, until one comes back to their true natural state as human beings and recognizes that it isn't, every tuck and fold and wrinkle in the body that makes them beautiful. It's the being that they are that holds the true actual state of being and beauty. So, powerful stuff. Thank you for opening that conversation up.
You're welcome.
Dr. Tim, any thoughts for you in that regard, Dr. Tim?
I've been practicing how I would beg out of this one. Enjoying the conversation, but I think your last, sentence or two really summarizes it. It's not a wrinkle. It's not a hunk of flesh. It's the person that we connect with. And most of us, if we slow down, if we get out of what the culture wants us to chase after in terms of ideals, most of us realize it's, there are all kinds of sayings out there. People don't remember what you did for them. They'll remember how they felt when they were with you. It's the resonant energy between us that's more important than that fading set of physical attributes, which is always shifting. That would be my input.
For sure. Most definitely. And, it's interesting. We asked that question about holding a newborn child, and everybody's agreement is that newborn is love. And we've labeled that or utilized a word to represent that as being. And then we ask people how many have done something they regret, and to list the feelings they had that drove them to do what it is that they regretted. And that list is always a totally different list and has every kind of hostility and fear that you can think of. And we point out that that is the non-being self. So we have two selves. We have the being, love, and we have the non-being based in hostility or fear. And Yeshua very clearly says, in order for you being to live, you non-being have to die. That's exactly what needs to be forgiven. And yet people who live in the non-being self form relationships with bodies because that's what they think they are. They think that, that picture in their minds of that body over there is actually the body that's over there when it's not. And to step away from, and, once one objectifies oneself, once one objectifies others and turns them into sexual objects, of course, we live in a culture that objects, when you finish with them, get thrown away. And so we live in a world where relationships are just throwaway. So I happen not to be happy today, so I throw you away. I get rid of you. Where if one lives as a true human being, then they have relationships with beings, and there are no throwaway beings. Beings are eternal. And when we relate to each other, being to being, it isn't, it's just such a different world. There's an interesting phrase in the scriptures that talks about there'll come a time when humans will lose the ability for natural affection. In other words, to relate to each other as human beings, and the loss, and it happens very early in childhood and is just picked up on by the media and exacerbated to the nth degree, this whole idea of objects, that we're objects, and if our objects are beautiful enough, then we're acceptable, and if they're not beautiful enough, then, of course, we're not worth anything. And that facing fear that so many people carry and people live out of, and it's no wonder there's such violence in the world, that kind of pain that's triggered into activity that people turn to every kind of drug they can imagine. And one of the first drugs that people turn to is the drug of hostility, and to play that hostility out. If you haven't seen the film yet, thanks for sharing. Awesome depiction. And it's a movie that I haven't looked recently, but we bought several of them on Amazon for $6 each. It's a very powerful movie, but one of the things they show is several people are on the edge of falling off the wagon and going back to their, let's just say their apparent drug of choice, their expression of drug of choice. You'll see how it's depicted that each of them first turns to hostility. And when the hostility isn't enough to keep them anesthetized, then is when they turn to their other addictions, the ones that the world tends to treat. And I have suggested to several people over the decades that they start a 12-step Hostilities Anonymous. I've never heard of one, and maybe you have. I don't know, Gail. Perhaps there are Hostilities Anonymous, but if there aren't, that's the first drug of choice of virtually every person on the planet. That's the first thing that puts people into that anesthetic state. And you'll notice that the person who's, said, okay, I'm swearing off of alcohol or I'm swearing off of this drug or that as they get closer and closer to falling off the wagon, you watch them getting more and more hostile. And their hostility is an attempt to anesthetize the pain that's being aroused in them. And when the hostility isn't enough, that's when they finally, down the fifth of scotch. And until that hostility is alleviated, until one literally abstains from that drug, it's going to be hard to touch what one needs to inventory that's underneath that drug. And certainly, as I would see it, as an important step to literally abstain from that drug. And really, when that drug is desired, and it's a tough one because it's a freebie, and you can't just say I'm not going to the liquor store. It's internally generated. But watch that movie. Thanks for sharing, and watch how each case. There's several of them. Each case where they're either turning to or going to turn to their externalized drug of choice, hostility is where they start. And it's so important to inventory that one and clean that one up. Any thoughts there, Gail?
Absolutely. One of the things that I'm dealing with right now is I've been sober from alcohol and street drugs and other drugs for 17 years. Celebrated 17 years, not this past Sunday, but the Sunday before last on the 25th. And we've talked about this before, is that at most AA meetings, NA meetings, there is coffee and sugar and donuts and cookies and cake and all that
nicotine.
kind of stuff. Matter of fact, I was at a meeting last night, and nicotine, people in the 90s when I first got sober, we were still smoking in meetings, and now people go outside to smoke before or after the meeting. And so when I was at Heartland this time, I was like, okay, I'm going to be here for 16 days. I'm going to detox, and I'm going to continue with that momentum and continue to abstain from sugar. And I picked out a partner from being at Heartland that had a lot more OA experience than I did. And so we picked each other out to be accountable to each other until we get OA sponsors and to be accountable on a daily basis. And so that's what we've been doing. And I've been noticing how fast my hostility comes up when I can't drown or anesthetize my feelings with that Pepsi. I haven't had a Pepsi in over 30 days. And, I've been noticing my feelings.
That's
and
awesome.
Where I go, where I go with hostility and how fast it comes up and how fast I direct it towards others. I mean, that came up at Heartland during class. And anyway.
Powerful.
Yeah,
One of the things to notice when you stop something like Pepsi, you're actually stopping 3 drugs, 3 anesthetics. Sugar, caffeine, and phosphoric acid are 3 drugs that are being abstained from when you drop a Pepsi, or a Coke, or any of those. So something like that can be a tough addiction. And the first place, of course, to catch it all is when the breath is starting to be held. That's the first step in shutting down and not wanting to. The next one is the language of denial, the holding of the breath, and then reaching for some form of weakening agent, usually food, hostility, caffeine, sugar, nicotine, and all the rest. I remember back, I was about 35 years ago, I had a small center in Atlanta, and we were relatively purist in the center, and I had no idea what I was getting myself into. There was a medical doctor from Emory University who was a 12-step person, and he had a large group of people that he sponsored in 12-step people, and he asked if I would do a Why Is This Happening to Me Again workshop at my center. And so we went ahead and invited them and did that. And the berserkness that showed up in the room when there was no sugar and there was no caffeine was just unreal, unbelievable. And it was like, at first I didn't get it. I didn't realize what was going on, but they're like, oh, well, these people don't want to come back to your center. It's like, well, what do you mean? Why? Well, you can't smoke, and, you're not serving coffee, and you're not serving, there's no sugar there. You had honey. I mean, just, it was pretty interesting. And so the number of different anesthetics that if we choose to abstain, then you get to access what the drug has anesthetized. And when you realize how deeply ingrained these things are in our culture, the withdrawal process, the moving into healing, is huge, monumental, and an ongoing daily work to do over the period of a whole lifetime. The consistent, persistent application of the tools of forgiveness is such a necessity. Very cool. Well, any other thoughts? We're down to about 5 minutes, and so maybe we could check with Jeannie and just see if there's anybody with a hand up in the phone queue or anything going on in the chat room. Jeannie?
Nobody has a hand up, and there's several people in the chat room. The only comment was Donna earlier said that around when we were talking about Addie and her comment about how she'd always dreamed of coming to that place, that in her mind, Addie was embodied in the moment how to live in the moment and the ability to pre-order a new reality in that moment. I like that. That's cool.
Awesome. Good insight, yes.
So we've got 5 minutes, and our call-in number is 516-418-5786. Press 1. And watch for the newsletter. It's getting ready to come out. Oh, a hand just went up.
Great. Let's say hello.
901. You're on the air.
Hi, this is Brenda in Memphis. And I just wanted to give you an update on our worksheet hours of work that we do at 11 o'clock each day. We had a new guest join us. So a woman who has done several seminars. She has not done the laws of living, and we encourage anybody, whoever's doing worksheets, to join us at 11 o'clock. And let's see, I don't have the phone number right offhand.
Maybe Gail's
come and join us. And pardon me?
Maybe Gail's got it. And you have the call-in number for anyone who wants to join a worksheet support group that happens every day, 5 days a week, an hour before the radio show. So in Eastern time from 12 to 1 o'clock, you can call in and get specific support for worksheets. Do you happen to have the number handy, Gail?
I do. It is 515-739-1020. And the code is 959 327, and then pound.
Okay, why don't you read that back to us again? The number is
515 739-1020. And the
code
is 959-327-pound. And
awesome.
That is also the same number for the conference calls for the Laws of Living work, and those are from 6:30 to 8:30 a.m. Sunday through Saturday, 7 days a week till we get everybody through. And then we also meet at night. This is all Central Standard Time from 10 p.m. until 11 p.m. Please save me from the elevator music and join me. And then we do a weekly conference call for Laws of Living as well, and that's at Sunday at 6:30 p.m. And we just completed our second very successful conference call this past Sunday, and we've had up to 6 people on the call in the past, and meaning the weekly calls. I think we had 6 people on the call this past Sunday, and then the daily calls we've had up to 6 people on that call. But this morning there was only 3 of us, and we just keep going through the same routine of getting the sheets done and getting the work done and supporting each other and asking questions and making some suggestions and experimenting. And
Fabulous. Brenda, thank you for bringing that up. Any other thoughts for you?
I just wanted to say that I successfully have caught up on my worksheets for this week as of today.
Awesome.
Now, that I'm not caught up in the last 2 weeks, but this 11 o'clock call is very, very helpful. So if it's anyone who's having some procrastination issues on worksheets, we encourage you to join us. That's it. Have a blessed day.
Fabulous. Thank you for that reminder. 11 until noon Central Time. You can call in, so you can get 2 hours of support. Our radio show 5 days a week. And then the hour before the radio show, specific work on the wake-up sheet, the reality management process. So join that call as well. In the meantime, we invite everybody to create the best year yet of your eternal life. Much appreciation for joining us. Blessings. Bye-bye.